Philip took leave and came home to share his wife's duties as she stood in for her father at official functions. An operation to remove one of the king's lungs seemed to go well, so the next year the royal couple flew to Nairobi on the first leg of a Commonwealth tour. It was Mike Parker who picked up news of the king's death on a shortwave radio after speaking to Martin Charteris, Princess Elizabeth's private secretary, and woke Philip at a Kenyan lodge. According to Parker, his private secretary, the prince looked as though the whole world had dropped on his shoulders. Lady Pamela Hicks, who was also there, recalled that Philip's first reaction was to put a newspaper over his face and remain motionless for 5 minutes. Pamela said, and then he pulled himself together and said he must go and find the princess. She was having a rest in her bedroom. And so they went for a walk in the garden, and you could tell, walking up and down, that he was telling her. She came back to the lodge and one just thought, this poor girl who really adored her father, they were very close. I think I gave her a hug and said how sorry I was. And then suddenly I thought, my God, but she's queen. The awful thing, added Pamela, was that the couple hadn't expected her to take on the job until they were in their 50s. Elizabeth requested that no pictures be taken as she left the lodge, but there were a couple of photographers already outside. We stood silently outside the lodge, one of them recalled, as the cars drove away in a cloud of dust, not one of us taking a shot at that historic moment. Seeing the young girl as Queen of Great Britain as she drove away, I felt her sadness as she just raised her hand to us as we stood there silent, cameras on the ground. When the Queen arrived back at Heathrow on February 7, 1952, Winston Churchill and the rest of the Privy Council lined up to greet her. At that moment, Philip knew that his life had changed forever. Years later, he recalled, people used to come to me and ask me what to do. In 1952, the whole thing changed, very, very considerably. Churchill insisted he and the new Queen move to the palace, an enormous wrench for Philip, for whom Clarence House had been the only home he'd ever been able to call his own. For the Queen, however, it was simply a matter of going to the place where she'd lived very happily for much of her life. For the prince, problems soon multiplied. Philip was constantly being squashed, snubbed, ticked off, rapped over the knuckles, said Mike Parker. It was intolerable. The problem was simply that Philip had energy, ideas, get up and go, and that didn't suit the establishment, not one bit. In his new role, Philip sought the guidance of Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who, as the husband of Queen Juliana, had 15 years' experience as consort. Bernhard told him, practically everything you do will be a subject of criticism. You can't ignore it because some of it may be justified. And even if it isn't, it may be politic to heed it. But don't let it get you down. In this job, you need a skin like an elephant. For Philip at this point, frustration, irritation, and disappointment were daily occurrences. But, with Parker's help, he set about modernizing the palace, much to the consternation of the old guard. Among other things, he started a footman training program, set in hand redecoration of the gloomy private apartments, and installed a nearby kitchen so that food didn't have to be traipsed along miles of drafty corridors. And as chairman of the Coronation Commission, he oversaw every detail of the ceremony. Leaving nothing to chance, he even stood on the palace balcony to find the best angle from which the Queen, still wearing her heavy crown, could watch the fly past after the ceremony without getting a crick in her neck. But losing his career and being relegated to backroom status couldn't help but occasionally grate on him. His chief role in the coronation on June 2, 1953, was to kneel before his wife, taking the ancient oath of fealty. I, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, do become your liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. He then had to stand, kiss her cheek and back away. But at the rehearsal, possibly feeling a bit emasculated, he mumbled the words quickly, missed the Queen's cheek and retired backwards fast. The Queen told him off, don't be silly, Philip. Come back here and do it properly. 500,000 people turned up in the rain to line the coronation route. Inside Westminster Abbey, photographer Cecil Beaton noted the Queen's sugar-pink cheeks and tightly curled hair and her demeanor of simplicity and humility. As she walked, he said, she allowed her heavy skirt to swing backwards and forwards in a beautiful rhythmic effect. The coronation was a deeply moving spiritual experience for her, said the Queen's cousin Margaret Rhodes, especially the part which wasn't filmed when she stood bareheaded, wearing only a white linen shift as the Archbishop of Canterbury marked the sign of the cross on her with the words, as Solomon was anointed by Zadok the priest, so be thou anointed, blessed, and consecrated as Queen over the people thy God hath given thee to govern. When it came to Philip's part, he performed well, but his touch on the crown was a bit heavy-handed and his wife had to adjust it. Over the years, he never forgot his pledge to be her liege man of life and limb. At times, he'd be irascible, laddish, and difficult, but he would always give the Queen his wholehearted support.